And since the end of the Second World War, we've seen a period of increasing trade, and trade as a percentage of GDP has got to sort of record levels, and it's been a constantly increasing percentage over that period of time. And it was only a couple of years ago that Russia and China would join the World Trade Organization, and it seemed like globalization was unstoppable. And within a matter of 5 years to 5 to 7 years, and probably since the GFC period of time, but that seemed to be over, and we seem to be now entering a period of fragmenting into trading blocks, breaking ourselves across ideological sort of lines as well. Hyperglobalization in the Western world really happened over that period of time, and politicians were happy to globalize and were happy to support trade, and it may have been at a disadvantage of their own workers in their own markets. And we saw a number of jobs going offshore, but we were happy to do that because from a sort of a geopolitical safety perspective, if we believe that we are a greater interconnected world, then there'd be less chance that we would go to war against each other. And that's that trade-off of jobs going offshore versus, being a greater connected world. It seemed like a good trade-off at that point in time. But we seem to have reached an inflection point recently. There's certainly a certain portion of society that believes that we reversing that and that haven't enjoyed the benefits of globalization. The flow of trade has actually become a lot harder. And so what you see is governments, whether it be the Chinese or the US, their own sort of industries for their own benefit as well. And some of that's political to obviously get their votes in the door, and some of it's also driven along ideological lines as well. So if I'm a corporate, I'm actually looking at those. What are those trends that are upcoming, and how do I benefit from that as an organization? Okay, and so take BYD as an example. Okay, BYD or saw that the trend was that the Chinese government was encouraging EV, was encouraging sort of home domestics, production of EV cars and that whole industry. So they jumped on that trend, and so therefore the companies that have succeeded and done well by this deglobalization and fragmentation are those who were able to identify the trends, saw where the policy was going, and capitalized upon that. So that's how I think the winners in this have played out, is that to be able to identify that, and quite early on, that the world's becoming more fragmented, and to capitalize upon those trends and to follow the policy. So if you follow the policy, you're a winner, if that makes sense. If you're shall we say, more a multinational corporate from what we would say from the Western, traditional Western economies, you built up a position probably since the 70s or 80s in those more developing markets. You've got an established business in China, where you've got a supply chain across Southeast Asia. So you're now thinking about, how do I not decouple, but how do I de-risk? And I'm using those words quite selectively. So how do I de-risk my position? So if I'm selling into China, what am I worried about? I'm worried about geopolitical situations, and I'm worried about the sales that I have in China. Am I going to see a situation like Russia, okay, whereby Russia was cut off from the rest of the world, became a pariah, and what do I do with my business? So if China does go to that extreme, how do I position my business going forward? So how do I de-risk that? And so we've seen a lot of our clients trying to reorganize their business. So if that a situation like Russia happens, and the obvious situation is Taiwan, that their China business, if I'm selling it to China, can stand alone by itself. So we're seeing many clients reorganize from a legal and structuring point of view, that their China business would be standalone in that scenario. Okay, so if I've got 30% of my sales in China, I'm worried about that if something happens, I can separate that business and treat it as it is. And then the final class, I would say, is those companies which have supply chains which were focused on around China, and I'm looking to de-risk that as well. So I'd say there's three classes that I just identified. The first class being I was able to pick up, the BYD situation. I was able to understand the trends. I was able to pick up where the policy was going and capitalize upon that. The second one being I've got an established business already across Asia Pacific, and I sell into China. And so therefore, if something happens around the geopolitical situation, how do I separate that business and de-risk it? And then the third one, supply chain. How do I diversify my supply chain? Now, I probably can't at this point in time completely decouple myself from China. That's sort of, but how do I de-risk that position?